When Prescott laughed like that, it felt like he was trying to push me back into the small box he had kept me in for 3 long years. He stared at me like he expected me to crumble, like he thought his words still had the power to control my choices. But for the first time since I joined that company, I wasn't bothered. I had lived through his put-downs, his fake compliments, and the way he made my achievements look like his generous guidance. I knew that no matter how hard I worked, he would always take the credit and leave me standing in the shadows. So when he smirked and said I'd never find anything better, I simply breathed out and let his words fall flat. Inside, I felt something different, a steady confidence that came from knowing a truth he couldn't even imagine. He didn't know where I had been going during my lunch breaks. He didn't know who had been sitting across from me, listening to my ideas with genuine interest, treating me like someone who mattered. He had no idea that I had already stepped into a world where my voice wasn't just heard, it was valued. For months, I had been meeting Alistair Vance in that quiet corner booth on Elm Street. Most people in the industry spoke his name with respect, calling him a genius who changed the game and then suddenly disappeared. To me, he wasn't some myth. He was the one person who looked at my notes, my sketches, my ideas, and said, "You're onto something big." While Prescott doubted me, Alistair pushed me to think bigger. While Prescott treated me like a tool, Alistair treated me like a mind worth investing in. So when I stood in that office and heard Prescott's ugly laugh, I didn't feel small. I felt free. I thought about those afternoons spent discussing solutions, innovations, and ideas that didn't need to be hidden or watered down. I thought about the offer Alistair had quietly handed me only days earlier, the one that would change everything for me. And I realized that Prescott wasn't laughing at my resignation. He was laughing at his own imagination of who he thought I was. I picked up my resignation letter from his desk, placed it back down gently, and thanked him for his time. Not because I meant it, but because it was the last polite thing I ever needed to say to him. He didn't know that his chapter in my life had ended long before I walked into that office. As I walked out, I didn't look back. I didn't need to. Prescott believed he had won something in that moment. He didn't understand that I was already moving towards something he could never take from me. And as I left that building, I knew one thing for sure. Sometimes the sweetest revenge is simply walking away with the truth that you were never the one who needed them. For 3 years, I moved through Titan dynamics like someone no one bothered to notice. I did the work that kept projects alive, solved problems before anyone else even saw them, and built systems that made the company look sharper than it really was. I stayed late, fixed mistakes quietly, and tried to improve anything I touched. But even with all of that, my name never left the background. It was as if everything I created was meant to stay hidden behind someone else's smile. Prescott had the perfect image: confident, smooth-talking, and always ready to take credit the moment something went right. I learned quickly that he loved the spotlight more than the actual work. When something succeeded, he made sure his name appeared first. When something failed, he acted as if he had never seen it before. And somehow people believed him. He spoke with such certainty that no one questioned who had actually done the heavy lifting. I didn't come from a fancy school or have connections like the rest of the people he invited to his inner circle. I only had determination. I wanted to prove to myself that talent didn't need a perfect background to matter. So I kept giving everything I had, thinking someone would eventually see the truth. Instead, each accomplishment only gave him more material to display as his own. Projects that took me weeks of planning would appear in meetings under his name. Documents I wrote were presented as if he had drafted them from scratch. Even the ideas he once dismissed became brilliant insights when he repeated them later. I watched him stand in front of executives and praise himself for strategies he barely understood. He always made sure to say that his team helped, but the credit was always shaped to look like a gift he had generously allowed us to take part in. There were moments when I wanted to speak up, but the environment made it impossible. Titan Dynamics was built on hierarchy, on keeping quiet, on pretending everything was fair even when it wasn't. Anyone who challenged the system was quietly pushed out or labeled as difficult. I wasn't afraid of hard work, but I knew better than to become someone they dismissed as a problem. So I stayed silent and kept creating, even though each success felt like it was slipping out of my hands the second he touched it. The strange thing was, the more he ignored me, the more I grew determined to outgrow the position he tried to trap me in. I could feel myself getting better, sharper, more capable. Every task he tossed at me became an opportunity to learn. Every time he took credit, it pushed me to build something stronger next time. It was like training in the dark, No praise, no recognition, just pure skill sharpening itself quietly. Looking back, those years taught me more than any mentor could have. They showed me how to rely on myself, how to trust my own instincts, and how to keep building even when no one was watching. Prescott thought he was using me, but he never understood what those years were really shaping. He didn't see that the person he tried to keep small was slowly turning into someone he would one day regret underestimating. When the company announced the opening for the Director of Innovation position, I finally felt like there was a chance for my work to be seen clearly. I had spent weeks shaping a proposal that showed a new direction for the company, one that used modern tools and smart systems to help us grow faster. I didn't leave anything out. I explained each step, each benefit, and how the company could rise above its competitors. For the first time in a long while, I felt proud walking into that presentation room. I believed the effort would speak for itself. When I finished, the room stayed quiet for a moment. A few people nodded, and others whispered to each other. It felt like the kind of silence that comes after something meaningful. I left thinking maybe, just maybe, this was the moment where my work would finally be recognized. I wasn't expecting applause, just a fair chance. Later that afternoon, Prescott asked me to meet him in his office. His tone, calm and smooth, didn't reveal anything. I walked in and saw him leaning back, holding a glass like he was celebrating something. He didn't bother with small talk. He simply said they had made their choice, and it wasn't me. He spoke casually, as if the decision didn't deserve any real explanation. His reason felt like a slap. He said Jax fit the culture better, even though Jax barely knew the company. He had been there only a short time, long enough to shake hands, laugh loudly in hallways, and charm the people who liked flashy confidence over hard work. Prescott described him as someone who could connect with people, but everyone knew the real reason. Jax's last name carried weight, and his family name mattered more to Prescott than years of actual contribution. I sat there listening, trying to stay calm while my mind replayed all the long nights, the ideas I had pushed through, and the belief I kept trying to hold on to. For a moment, I wondered if I had misunderstood everything. If maybe I had been giving too much to a place that never planned to value me at all. The truth settled slowly. They had never considered me. My work had been useful, but I wasn't someone they saw leading anything. Something inside me shifted that day. I didn't argue. I didn't try to defend myself. There was no point telling someone the truth when he had already chosen convenience over merit. Instead, I let the words sink in. Not because they hurt, but because they clarified everything I needed to know. Walking out of that office, I felt strangely steady. The disappointment was real, but so was the clarity. I didn't feel lost. I felt done. The last thin piece of faith I had in that place finally broke, and what replaced it was a new kind of focus, quiet, sharp, and ready. That was the moment I stopped trying to earn a seat at their table. Instead, I decided I would build something they could never take credit for, something they couldn't touch or twist. The decision wasn't loud or dramatic. It was simple. I was finished giving my best to people who only saw me when it suited them. During those months when everyone at work thought I was simply taking short breaks to clear my head, something very different was happening. I wasn't sitting alone or replaying office disappointments in my mind. Instead, I was meeting someone who understood ideas the way I did. Someone who saw possibility where others only saw routine. It started by chance, a small conversation over shared table space at a cafe, but it quickly turned into something far more meaningful than either of us expected. Alistair Vance was nothing like the loud voices that usually filled the corporate world. He carried himself with a quiet confidence, the kind that comes from building something remarkable and stepping away before the system could swallow him. People had stories about him, calling him a genius who built a company strong enough to challenge giants and then disappeared without explanation. What they didn't understand was that he hadn't given up. He had simply stepped back to observe the industry he once shaped. The first time we talked, he noticed the notes I was reviewing. Instead of asking basic questions or pretending to be interested, he leaned in with genuine curiosity. One question led to another, and soon we were discussing problems and solutions like we had been working together for years. He didn't talk down to me or try to control the conversation. He treated every idea with seriousness, even the ones I wasn't sure about. Those meetings started becoming a habit. Every lunch break, we sat at the same corner table, surrounded by the quiet buzz of the cafe. We didn't waste time with small talk. We went straight into exploring new concepts, breaking apart old systems, and imagining what the future could look like if creativity wasn't limited by office politics. He pushed my thinking in ways no one at Titan Dynamics ever had. What surprised me most was the way he listened. He paid attention not just to the big ideas, but to the small details most people ignored. He saw patterns, connections, and weaknesses instantly, and yet he always asked for my thoughts before giving his own. Talking to him felt like stepping into a space where my mind could finally breathe. He once told me that he valued minds that worked from curiosity rather than fear. Hearing that made something click inside me. He saw the effort and insight I carried, things I had been hiding for years because I knew the wrong people would use them for themselves. Instead of treating my ideas as tools, he treated them as sparks worth protecting and exploring. Over time, our conversations stopped feeling like simple discussions. They became lessons, challenges, and inspirations all at once. I didn't realize how much I had been shrinking myself in the office until I sat across from someone who encouraged me to think without limits. Those quiet afternoons became the place where my true work lived. While Prescott imagined I was wasting time or feeling defeated, I was actually building something new inside myself: confidence, direction, and a vision untouched by the pettiness of Titan Dynamics. Alistair didn't just guide me. He reminded me of who I could be when my ideas weren't trapped under someone else's shadow. 5 months into our quiet meetings, I walked into the cafe thinking it would be another day of sharing ideas and sketching out possibilities. I didn't expect anything unusual. The table was the same, the soft hum of conversations around us was the same, and the familiar smell of fresh coffee floated in the air. Alistair was already there, sitting with the calm expression he always carried, but something in his eyes looked more settled, almost like he had reached a decision. We talked for a while, going over a concept we had been shaping for days. But then he stopped mid-sentence and set his hand flat on the table. His voice softened in a way I hadn't heard before. He told me he had never actually stepped away from the industry. He had been watching from the sidelines, waiting for someone who hadn't been dulled or controlled by the usual corporate pressure. His words weren't dramatic. They were steady, honest, and very clear. Before I could respond, he slid an envelope toward me. It wasn't marked with a company logo or anything fancy. Just simple white paper, folded neatly. I opened it, expecting maybe notes or a new idea he wanted me to explore. Instead, I found an official offer. He wanted me to join his new company, not as an assistant or a manager, but as the chief visionary officer, the person who would help shape the direction of the entire venture. Reading through it felt unreal. Not because of the salary, even though it was far more than I had ever imagined earning. What struck me the most was the trust the role carried. He wasn't offering a position to fill space. He was offering responsibility, influence, and a chance to build something meaningful without the constant fear of someone taking advantage of my work. It was a door opening into a world I always wished existed. Alistair explained that he wanted a place where ideas weren't dismissed or twisted to fit someone else's agenda. He talked about creating a company built on curiosity, honesty, and innovation, not ego or shortcuts. As he spoke, I realized that every meeting we had wasn't just about discussing concepts. He had been learning about how I thought, how I solved problems, and how I handled challenges. And still, he chose me. For a long moment, I didn't know what to say. No one had ever trusted me on this level. No one had looked at my ideas and seen a future worth building. I felt something shift inside me, like a weight I had been carrying without noticing finally fell away. He told me to take time to think, but I already knew my answer. This was my chance to step into a place where my work belonged to me, where I didn't have to hide my best ideas or shrink so someone else could shine brighter. It was freedom, plain and simple. I closed the envelope, met his eyes, and felt a calm certainty settle in my chest. The choice wasn't difficult. It felt like the first real step toward the life I was meant to build. Leaving Prescott's office that day felt strangely peaceful. His smug laugh still lingered in the air, but it no longer touched me. I didn't react, argue, or try to change his mind. I simply nodded, thanked him out of basic politeness, and walked out. It felt like stepping away from a long, draining storm I had been stuck in without realizing how tired I was. The hallway looked the same as always, yet something inside me knew I was finished with everything that kept me small. When I reached my desk, people around me exchanged quick glances. Some looked confused, others worried. A few whispered quietly, wondering what I was doing. They didn't understand why anyone would leave without a plan they could see. They believed the company was the only safe place, the only ladder worth climbing. I didn't expect them to understand. They didn't know what I had been working toward, or who had finally seen the potential I had been hiding. They only saw someone packing up without a fight. I opened my drawers and began gathering my things. There wasn't much, just a few notebooks, a mug, and a couple of small items I kept to make the space feel less cold. The box stayed light as I filled it, which made sense. I had never been given anything here that truly mattered. Most of what I had built over the years wasn't something I could put in cardboard anyway. My real work lived in my ideas, in the things I had learned quietly, and in the confidence I had grown away from the spotlight Prescott kept for himself. Coworkers stopped by one, gently asking if I was sure about leaving. They spoke with the kind of concern people have for someone stepping into the unknown. I didn't answer their questions directly. I didn't explain how long I had been preparing for this moment or how ready I felt. I just told them I would be fine. Some offered hugs, others just nodded, unsure of what to say. I appreciated their kindness, but I didn't feel the need to justify my choice. Sometimes the best decisions are the ones you don't have to explain. Carrying the box toward the elevator felt almost symbolic. It weighed almost nothing, and that lightness felt honest. I wasn't losing anything. I was letting go. When the elevator doors opened, I stepped inside and felt a quiet relief settle over me. By the time I reached the parking lot, the pressure I had carried for years had already begun to fade. Placing the box in my car, I stood there for a moment, breathing in the fresh air. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel tired. I felt awake. I wasn't walking away because I was defeated. I was walking away because I finally had a place where my talent would be used with respect. I closed the car door and looked back at the building one last time. It wasn't painful. It wasn't even bittersweet. It was simply a chapter ending. I wasn't the overlooked employee anymore. I had become someone who understood her own worth. Someone ready to build something bigger. Someone who no longer belonged in the shadows of other people's achievements. Driving away, I finally felt aligned with who I truly was, a person capable of far more than Titan dynamics ever allowed me to be. I wasn't disappearing. I was finally stepping into the strength I had kept hidden for years. 1 month after joining Alistair's new venture, my life looked completely different. My days were full of planning, researching, and shaping ideas that finally had room to grow. I worked with a team that valued fresh thinking, and every meeting felt like a chance to build something meaningful. I didn't spend time wondering what anyone from my old job thought of my absence. I was focused on the future, not the place I had left behind. But everything shifted the morning the headlines appeared. I had just sat down at my desk when a flood of alerts filled my phone. At first, I thought it was a glitch. Then I saw the first article. A well-known industry magazine had published a bold headline announcing Alistair's return and highlighting my role in his new mission. It didn't just mention my position. It placed my name right beside his, describing me as the person leading a major initiative called Project Phoenix. Seeing my name printed like that felt unreal. For years, I had watched others receive praise for work I quietly created. Now, suddenly, I was being recognized in a way I had never imagined. I read the article slowly, taking in every line. They called me a rising strategist and a surprising but powerful choice. It was strange to see people talk about me without dismissing or minimizing my efforts. Within minutes, the news spread across multiple platforms. Every major business page picked it up, each adding its own angle. Some focused on Alistair returning to the spotlight, while others questioned what Project Phoenix could mean for the industry. Almost all of them mentioned my name. My phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Messages from people I hadn't spoken to in years, executives who had once ignored me, and acquaintances who suddenly remembered my number. Among the messages was one from a former coworker who had always been honest with me. He wrote that Prescott had seen the news during an investor meeting. According to him, Prescott froze mid-sentence, completely thrown off. The text said it looked like someone had pulled the floor out from under him. Reading that didn't make me smug, but it did bring a quiet sense of closure. For so long, Prescott had acted as if I was replaceable, like my ideas were small enough to be brushed aside. Now he had to watch those same ideas gain momentum in a space far beyond his control. I had spent years trying to earn respect in a place that never intended to give it, and now the world was seeing what I was capable of when I wasn't hidden behind someone else's shadow. What struck me most was how naturally everything unfolded. I hadn't tried to make a statement. I hadn't planned to prove anything to anyone. I had simply stepped into an opportunity that allowed me to grow. And because of that, My name ended up in places I never expected. Later that evening, as things finally calmed down, I sat quietly and thought about the journey that brought me here. It felt almost surreal to see how far things had shifted in just a few weeks. I didn't feel like I was attacking anyone's empire. I was building my own path, guided by purpose rather than bitterness. But still, a truth settled gently in my mind. The woman who was once overlooked had now become impossible to ignore. The message from Prescott showed up before I even finished my morning coffee. Seeing his name pop up felt strange, almost unreal. Just weeks ago, he treated me like I was invisible, and now he was acting like we had always been close. His words were full of praise, but they didn't sound sincere. It was the kind of message someone sends when they feel the ground moving under their feet and want to grab anything to stay steady. He wrote as if he had believed in me from the start, but I knew the truth. I remembered the way he brushed off my ideas, the way he talked over me, and the way he acted like losing me was nothing. Now that he saw my name linked with Alistair and a project that had the entire industry buzzing, he was suddenly eager to reconnect. It was clear he wasn't reaching out because he respected me. He was reaching out because he was scared. I read the message once slowly, then again just to be sure I wasn't imagining the sudden shift in tone. His words tried to sound warm, but they felt cold and calculated. He wanted to attach himself to something rising because his own ship was tilting. I could almost picture him pacing around his office, typing and retyping his message until it sounded just right, hoping I would believe he had always been supportive. But I didn't need his approval anymore. I didn't need his fake praise or his attempt to rewrite history. I didn't even feel anger, just a quiet understanding that this was what people do when they realize they underestimated the wrong person. They pretend they didn't. They try to slip back in before the door fully closes. Instead of replying, I let the message sit untouched. Leaving it unread felt like the cleanest response. No fight, no explanation, no energy wasted. Silence can be louder than any comeback, and in this moment, it felt like the right choice. My day moved on without him. While emails kept coming in from reporters, collaborators, and people excited about the new direction Alistair and I were building, that one message faded into the background like noise I didn't need anymore. I focused on my work, on the new team that actually believed in ideas instead of stealing them, and on the quiet confidence that came from finally being in a place where my voice mattered. The contrast made Prescott's sudden attempt to reconnect feel even smaller. By the afternoon, I had almost forgotten the message existed. Almost. But every now and then the thought crossed my mind, and it brought a simple, calm feeling. Not satisfaction, not revenge, just closure. The kind that comes when you realize you've moved so far beyond someone that their opinion no longer touches you. Prescott reached out because he feared losing what he once took for granted. I ignored him because I finally understood my own worth. The night of the summit felt unreal from the moment I walked into the hall. The room was filled with people who had shaped the industry for years, yet somehow I was the one stepping onto the stage. The award in my hand felt smooth and solid, like proof that everything I had worked for was finally being seen. When the applause settled and the lights softened, I spoke about honesty, teamwork, and giving people space to grow. I talked about how ideas deserved respect and how leaders should lift others instead of stepping on them. As I looked across the audience, my eyes landed on Prescott. His expression was hard to read, almost like he wasn't sure whether to clap or glare. His smile looked forced, as if it was holding back something bitter. For a moment, I wondered if he was thinking about all the times he brushed off my work, believing no one would ever notice. Now he was sitting there, watching the person he ignored stand under the spotlight. After the event, people gathered around to congratulate me. I answered their questions and shook their hands, but out of the corner of my eye I noticed Prescott making his way toward me. He looked nervous, like someone preparing for a conversation they couldn't avoid. Finally, he stepped close enough to speak. "Sloan," he said, his voice unsteady. "We need to talk." He glanced around as if trying to make sure no one could hear. "There may have been some misallocations of credit during your time at the firm. Things weren't handled the way they should have been." It was almost strange hearing him say it out loud. Not because it wasn't true, but because he had spent years pretending everything was fair. Now he was trying to rewrite the story before it reached a place he couldn't control. Maybe he feared what people would think when they realized I had been doing the work he took credit for. Maybe he was scared of losing investors or damaging his reputation. Whatever the reason, his apology didn't sound like regret. It sounded like panic. I kept my face calm and steady. After everything I had carried in silence, I didn't feel the need to raise my voice. I didn't need to remind him of every moment he dismissed me. I simply met his eyes and let the truth settle between us. They weren't misallocated, I said quietly. They were taken. And that's over now. For a second, he didn't move. It was as if the words hit harder than he expected. The room around us stayed bright and warm, filled with people celebrating the night, but he looked like someone standing in a cold shadow. I didn't wait for him to respond. I walked away toward the people who actually valued what I brought to the table. As I stepped into the crowd, I felt something shift inside me. It wasn't anger or triumph. It was release, like closing a chapter that had been waiting too long to end. He cornered me in the hallway, the tension in his voice barely contained. "Did you plan this?" he asked, his eyes sharp and searching. "Was Vance courting you while you were still on my payroll?" There was a mix of disbelief and wounded pride in his tone, the kind of tone reserved for people who believed they controlled everything. I looked at him steadily, seeing the man who had underestimated me for years, and answered with calm honesty. "No," I said. "I just kept building. Even when you put your name on my work, even when you tried to make me invisible, I kept creating. You were the best lesson in what leadership should never be." The words were simple, but they carried years of silent frustration, careful planning, and finally freedom. They weren't meant to hurt him. They were meant to acknowledge the truth, a truth he had never understood. I didn't wait for his response. I turned and walked toward the people who had truly mattered in my journey, the team I had joined under Alistair's guidance. They were full of energy, creativity, and loyalty. Every project, every idea we developed together felt alive and powerful. Unlike the sterile, credit-stealing environment I had left behind, this team thrived on collaboration and respect. Their excitement, their focus, and their trust in each other reminded me why I had chosen this path. As I rejoined them, I realized that my victory wasn't about Prescott. It wasn't about proving him wrong in a public confrontation or showing him how much he had lost. My revenge wasn't loud or dramatic. It was quiet, steady, and enduring. It was in the work I had created, the projects I had led, and the team that valued and respected every contribution. It was in knowing that the foundations I helped build were strong enough to outlast his attempts to claim them. For the first time in years, his laughter, the laughter that once echoed through offices, meant to intimidate and belittle, felt distant and meaningless. It no longer had power over me. It had no weight because I had replaced it with something far stronger: respect, autonomy, and the knowledge that my work and talent finally had a place where they could flourish. Walking through the office, surrounded by people who shared my vision, I felt complete. The years of unnoticed effort, of being dismissed, of silent struggle, all led to this moment. My triumph wasn't about defeating him. It was about building something so remarkable that his judgment and mockery could never touch it. I smiled quietly to myself. I had won, not by breaking anyone else, but by becoming the person I had always wanted to be: confident, recognized, and unstoppable. Do you think I did the right thing by walking away from Prescott and joining Alistair, or should I have stayed and fought for recognition? Share your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this.